Welcome to World Storytelling Cafe. I'm your storyteller today. My name is Amy Douglas, and I've brought you to Sadler's Wood, a wood full of bluebells and stitchwort and birdsong, and now it's going to be full of story because there was once a farmer and he lived just over the border in Wales, and everybody said he had the best view in the whole of Wales. His little farmhouse was nestled at the head of the valley, and when he looked out of his front door, he could see all of his fields full of cattle and sheep and crops all rolling out ahead of him in the valley below. There were hills rolling into mountains on either side. It was a beautiful view. And the farmer, he grew food for a living, but he grew flowers for fun. And just in front of his garden, he had a little patch that was a rose garden. And every year at the county show, he always seemed to manage to win first prize for his roses. And everybody would say to him, "How do you do it? How do you do it every single year? You manage to win first prize." And he would say, "That's for me to know, and for you not to find out." Because he did have a secret. And his secret was that every morning he would get up very early. He was a farmer. He would stretch. And as he stood up, he would feel the call of nature. Gravity would have its effect, and he would have to run down the stairs, pull on his boots, and he'd go out of the front door, not the back door. There was no indoor plumbing in the time of this story, but there was a little tea bath, the little outside loo in the back garden. He didn't go there. No, he went out the front door into the rose garden. He would go down to the bottom of the rose garden and he would water his roses. And that was his secret. And he was convinced it would fertilise the roses and at the same time it would get rid of all the bugs and pests. But unsurprisingly, it wasn't a secret that he particularly wanted everybody to know about. Well, this went on for weeks and months and years, until one day, a beautiful May morning, he got up early, had his usual stretch. As usual, felt gravity take effect, and ran down the stairs, pulled his boots on, out into the front garden, and best time of the day, that glorious moment of relief. The birds were singing the dawn chorus, the air was full of freshness and promise, and then he heard a little voice go, "Aye!" Well, the farmer jumped about 6 foot up in the air. There was a huge golden stream arc. But he couldn't see anything. "Aye! Down here!" The farmer looked down, and there on his feet was a tiny little man. "What do you think you're doing?" said the little man. Well, that was quite obvious, said the farmer. "Yes, every single morning it's the same thing. You come out here and you wee down my chimney. What have I ever done to you?" I didn't know," said the farmer. I didn't know there were any houses or chimneys or anybody out here at all. I come here to be on my own." "Well, there is," said the little man. "Can't you see?" "Oh, you mortals, I forget you can't see anything, can you? My foot to your foot, your eyes will see what my eyes see." And the little man took up his little foot, he put it on the farmer's big clod-hopping hobnailed boot, and it was like another world rolled out in front of the farmer. A world in the same space as ours, layered on top, and he saw that there was a little house, a little cottage nestled underneath the rose bushes. White walls, honeysuckle climbing up the wall, big cloud of steam coming out of the chimney, and by the front door there was a little woman with her apron up to her eyes. And out of the back door of that little cottage there was a little golden stream that went onto the path, onto the road, and there were other little houses and other people all glaring up at him, and there were tiny fields and tiny cows and tiny sheep, a whole town laid out before him. I didn't know," said the farmer. "Well, you do now," said the little man, "and what are you going to do about it?" I don't know, said the farmer. Once you take your foot off my foot, I won't be able to see you anymore, will I? And then I won't know where you are, and I won't know how not to tread on you. Well, don't worry too much about that, said the little man. Normally we can get out of the way just fine, and it's just this thing of you coming and wheeing down my chimney every morning. If you'd stop that, everything else will be fine. Brick up your front door. Don't use this garden quite so much, and stop wheeing on your roses. If you really feel the need, you can have a rose patch out your back garden. Nobody lives out there, you'll be fine that way. If you'll do that, then everything will go well with you. Well, I can do that, said the farmer. No problem, if that's all I need to do. Good, said the little man. And he took his foot off the farmer's foot, and it was like that carpet rolled back up again. All the houses and cattle and sheep, they all vanished, and the last to go was that little man, who vanished with a smile and a pop. Well, the cows had to wait to be milked that morning, and soon they were lowing with full udders, because the very first thing that the farmer did was to go back to his house and to brick up the front door. And he did build a rose patch in the back garden, but the roses in the front garden, they seemed to still do pretty well. In fact, possibly even better than before. And the farmer had a good idea that maybe somebody else was watering them for him. Well, all the farmer's friends, they laughed and they laughed and they laughed. You've got the best view in the whole of Wales, and you brick up your front door and use the back one. You've gone crackers. The farmer bore all their laughing with a good will and said nothing, because things were going well on that farm, just like the little man had said they would. His cows gave even more milk than before, and it was so rich and creamy. The sheep's wool was soft and fluffy, and that year at the county show, the farmer, of course, won first prize for his roses, but he won first prize for everything else too. He swept the board and won every prize going for best wool, best cheese, best cream, best interesting shaped 3 vegetables. Every prize there was, he won it. And when people asked him how he did it, he said, well, that's for me to know, and you not to find out. But he must have told somebody sometime, because somebody told it to me, and now you know too. Well, this is a cafe, and I'm having my storytelling picnic. So I'm hoping that you've brought a drink with you. You've got a cup of tea ready, or coffee, or water. I've brought myself tea. And the story that I'm going to tell you is about Mrs. Jones. And Mrs. Jones had 2 great loves in her life. One of them was tea. The other was her garden. And when he put the 2 together, that was her idea of bliss. First thing in the morning, she'd make herself a cup of tea, take it outside into the garden, sit on the bench, admire her flowers, listen to the birds singing, and drink in the scent of all the flowers around her. And people would ask Mrs. Jones, you must work so hard at your garden to keep it so beautiful, so full of flowers all year long. How do you do it? Have you got any hints, any tips? And she would shrug and say, well, it just sort of seems to look after itself. Well, people would shrug and nod. They knew perfectly well that there must be some secret she didn't want to share, because no garden looks after itself. And yet, for Mrs. Jones, it did seem to be the case. She would do the odd little bit of weeding and pruning, but there generally didn't seem to be anything to do. It did just sort of seem to look after itself. Well, every morning, Mrs. Jones would come downstairs, and she would put the kettle on, and she would get her teapot and her cup ready. She put the tea leaves in the teapot, and she would have a little jug waiting on the step with a coin by the side of it, waiting for the milkman to come. And she would listen to the click, clop, click, clop, click, clop sound that meant that the milkman was coming from the farm. bringing the fresh churns of milk ready to ladle out into her jug. She would hear the creak of the gate, the crunch, crunch, crunch as he walked up her pathway, and know that he would be picking up her jug, ladling the milk from the churn, bringing that fresh creamy milk back, and she would reheat the water, make sure that it's just at the boiling point, put it onto the tea leaves, and then she would go and get her milk, and it would be perfectly brewed, her tea, just waiting for the milk. She would pour the milk in first, then the tea, take it outside to drink. But one day, Mrs. Jones had gone through all the usual things that she did. She got the kettle on, she got the teapot and the teacup and the tea leaves. The jug was outside with the coin. She heard the click clop of the milkman coming. She'd heard the creak of the gate, the crunch crunch of him walking up the path. She knew that he'd taken the jug, filled it up. There was the creak of the gate, the crunch crunch crunch. So he brought the jug back. The tea was perfectly brewed. She went to the door, she opened it, she picked up the jug. It was empty. The coin was gone. The jug was empty. He must have forgotten to fill it. To be fair, it was the first time in 40 years that he had forgotten to fill her milk jug. But still, all that day, she had to drink her tea black and bitter. She was not in a good mood. The next day, she was up earlier than usual. The water was on, there was the teapot, there was the teacup, tea leaves all ready, jug ready, and she was looking forward to her milk to have a decent cup of tea. There was the click clop of the horse, the creak of the gate, the crunch of the gravel. She reheated the water, put the boiling water on the leaves. There was the creak of the gate, the crunch of the gravel, of the milk coming back. She went to the door. She opened the door, she picked up the jug. It was empty again. The coin was gone again. The gate was still just swinging shut. She tried to call out to the milkman, but he was already on the cart, clicking away, woman, woman, to the horse, and they were off. Mrs. Jones was too old to start running after milk carts at her age. But as she held up the jug again, she saw that it wasn't clean. There was a sheen. There had been milk in that jug, and that was gone. But who could possibly have stolen her milk in that short window of time? It was impossible. It couldn't have been a sparrow or a cat or anything. But who? How? She was completely flummoxed. The next day, she didn't bother putting the kettle on, putting the tea leaves or a cup or a pot ready or anything. She just sat by the window and waited and watched. There was the clip clop of the horse's hooves. Now, she had to put the jug out with the coin by the side of it. She lifted up the curtain and she watched as the milkman opened the gate, crunched up her path, picked up the jug, picked up the money, put the money in his belt. He took the jug back to the cart. He ladled the milk inside till it was brimming with the creamy milk. He brought it back up her path, put it on the step. He turned his back, and the moment he turned his back, the bush by the side of the door started to shake. And out of that bush stepped a little man. He wouldn't have even reached up to her knee. And he turned back and he held out his hand, and into his hand was put a hand even smaller than his, and he pulled out a little woman from the bush. And in the little woman's arms, tiny baby. The baby didn't look well. Its skin was grey, its cheeks were pinched. The two parents looked worried. And the man, he reached up and he took a long cornstalk, a straw from behind his ear, and he put one end in the jug of milk and the other in the baby's mouth, and the baby started to suck the milk, and the milk went down, till the jug was empty, and then all three of them vanished back into the bush again and were gone. Well, Mrs. Jones was furious. She was fuming. How dare they come and steal her milk? And every single drop of it. They'd taken the whole jug. They couldn't have just left it a little drop at the bottom for a cup of tea. Oh no. Well, she was going to teach them a lesson. She went to the door, she picked up the empty jug, she scrubbed it clean, and then she went and she got a jar of salt, and she took a great big handful of salt and she put that into the jar. Well, nobody would like salty milk, but salt is poison to the little people, to the fair folk, and she knew it. She knew who those little people were. She'd heard the stories. And the next day, that was the jug that she put out. And once again she sat and she watched. Ha! This would learn them. And she heard the clip, clop of the horse's hoofs coming down. There was the milkman. He creaked open the gate. He crunched up the path. He came to the step and he picked up the jug, put the money in his belt. He turned his back and he went and he filled the jug with the creamy milk from the cart, back through the gate, back up the path, put the jug on the step. The moment his back was turned once again, that bush began to shake. Out of the bush came the little man. He reached out his hand and he pulled out his wife, and there was the baby, still looking terribly ill, with its face pinched and grey. And once again the father, he took a cornstalk from behind his ear, put one end in the jug of milk, one end in the baby's mouth. Well, that baby started howling and howling. And the father, he looked at the jug of milk and he looked at the baby. He put his finger in the jug of milk. And then he looked up. And he looked straight at Mrs. Jones. He shook his head. And Mrs. Jones, she let the curtain fall. But it was too late. Their eyes had met. While Mrs. Jones, she thought she would have felt happy. She didn't. She had a sick feeling in the pit of her stomach. All that day was a bit of a daze. The next morning she cleaned her jug and she put it out once again for the milkman. And he came and he delivered the milk and he took the coin. And she made herself a cup of tea and she took it outside and she sat on her bench. It didn't taste as good as she expected it to. And as she sat there, she could feel that something was wrong. And at first, she couldn't put her finger on what it was. And then suddenly, ow! The back of her leg was pricked for something, and she looked and she realised there was a nettle growing underneath her bench and it had stung her. And then she saw that there were petals falling from the roses. There's a big fat dandelion in the middle of the lawn. Little weeds were starting to poke their heads in the flower beds. And now, finally, when it was too late, Mrs. Jones realised who had been looking after her garden all those years. But now they were gone, and she would have to do the gardening herself. And that's almost the end of the story, except a new family had moved in on the edge of the village. They had 3 children, and the wife, her belly was out here with another one on the way. And everybody was in awe of that wife, that mother. She took good care of all of those children. They always seemed to have a smile on their face. They were always well dressed and clean. But the garden, well, it had been a mess when they moved in. And every day it seemed to look a little bit better. It was coming into bloom. It was beautiful. How she managed to do all of that gardening and look after the children, nobody could understand it. And the other thing that was a bit queer about them, they did seem to get through an awful lot of milk. I mean, fair play, she had a lot of children, but every day the woman would put out one big jug on the doorstep and one little jug. I don't think they were the only ones that had found themselves a decent new home. So that story is one of the ones from Duncan Williamson, who was a great mentor to me. Duncan Williamson, fabulous Scottish traveller. He was also very fond of a brew. He quite liked special brew, but also a brew of tea. I think the two things that he couldn't live with in life were a cup of tea, and for him not so much a garden, but a cigarette. And I've been lucky to be given stories from several of the travellers. Duncan was the one that I spent the most time with. But I also knew Stanley Robertson. I didn't know him as well, but I would see him around the festivals and we'd always have a cup of tea at Whitby. And I went to stay with him and to see him just once in his home in Aberdeen. And he took me out to an old traveller road. And we sat in a wood like this one. Like this one, it was just a small wood. And it reached up from the old traveller road up the hillside, an oak grove. And we sat there and we had Dairy Lee sandwiches and a flask of tea. And he said, "Now, see that tree there? That's Old Cruvy. And I'll tell you the story of Old Cruvy. You can tell it again for me." And Sir Stanley, I will always tell it for you. Stanley was a great storyteller, and this is one of my favourites. And I hope you like it as well. Because Old Cruvy was an oak tree, the king of the oaks. Because that oak grove, it was once part of the lands of the Laird of the Black Arts. And not many people lived there because nobody wanted to be too close to the home and the hall of the Laird of the Black Arts. But there was a woman who lived in a tumble-down hut at the bottom of the hill. A woman who had come there with her tiny baby son and found a place where she could just about scratch a living and raise her child. And she lived there, eking what living she could from the woods and from the patch of land outside her house, until the boy, Jack, was 5 years old. And then the Laird of the Black Arts, who had never paid any attention to her before, came striding down the hillside, banged on her door, and when she opened it, he said, "Woman, I have come for my rent." And she said, "But I have nothing. I barely have enough food to keep body and soul together. I've certainly got no coin. I've got no money. I have nothing to give you, and I have nowhere else to go." "You do have something to give me. If you have no money, then you can pay me in work." And she said, "But I can't work for you. If I work for you, I won't manage to even eat." "Not your work, his." And the Laird of the Black Arts, he pointed at Jack, 5-year-old boy. And he said, "He can come and be my shepherd. He can come and keep an eye on the sheep for me." And that is what had to happen. From then on, each day, Jack would be dragged out and he would go and he would sit with the sheep. And his job was just to keep an eye out. There were lots of foxes and wolves in those parts and those times. And if he saw a fox or a wolf, more dangerous still and danger to the older sheep as well as the lambs, then he was to cry out and cry for help. A fox he was to try and scare away on his own. And so he'd protect the sheep. Well, every day Jack would go off with the sheep. And he would sit underneath Old Cruvy. He would sit beneath the branches of the trees, and when it was hot, the trees would shade him, and when it rained, Old Cruvy's branches and leaves were thickly woven together, and they would keep him dry, in the summertime at least, and even in the winter, it would give him some shelter. Then Jack, he would keep an eye on the sheep, and he would watch out for wolves and for foxes. But most of the time he had nothing to do except to sit and lean his back on the trunk of a tree. And as day after day, week after week, month after month went by, and he had no company at all, apart from at lunchtime, when his mother would always come up and she would sit with him for a little while and they would have just a little bit of a bite to eat together to make sure that he was all right, that he was getting on okay. But then she would have to go back to her own work and leave Jack alone once again. In those long days, sitting on his own beneath the trees, he would listen to the birds. And as the time went by, he would tune in to each of the different songs. And he would start to know what they meant. The alarm calls, and the defending of their nests, the wooing of their mates. And then he started to discern even more layers of meaning than that. Until at last he could understand the language of the birds. And apparently had a terrible accent, but he could also talk back, make himself understood to the birds. And at that point, the days got a lot more interesting because at least he could chat to the birds and see what was going on, though they too were busy and always had plenty of work to do as well. Well, as the years passed, Jack got older and his mother started coming less and less to see him at lunchtime. She had her work to do, and that hillside was getting harder and harder for her to walk up. And Jack, he was old enough now to take care of himself. He could carry his own lunch with him. And as his mother started coming to see him less, well, somebody else started coming to see him more. Because up at the hall of the Laird of the Black Art lived Mary, one of the kitchen maids. And she would come and she would smile at Jack, and if she could get some kitchen scraps, or she would bring them, and the two of them would sit and they would share, and she would stay for as long as she could, and the two of them would talk. And the two of them, they got to have a little bit of an understanding with each other, though there wasn't much hope of it going anywhere. Jack was paid no money for his work, just it went to go to pay the rent for the cottage that they had. And Mary, well, she earned barely any money as a kitchen maid. There was no way that the two of them could afford to set up home together, to start a family. But still, it was good to dream, and it was good to have the company. And then one day, when Jack was not a child anymore, but a young man, he was sat keeping an eye on the sheep as he did every other day. But the bird song had changed. The birds, they were so loud and excited, they were flittering and fluttering everywhere. Everywhere was awash with noise and chaos. And Jackie called one of the birds down, and a blackbird came and sat on his wrist, and he said, "What's going on? What's happening?" And the blackbird said, "Jack, don't you know? Don't you know what today is?" And Jack said, "Well, it is a special day. It's midsummer, but I still don't understand what all the fuss is about." "It's not just any midsummer," said the bird. It's the midsummer's day when old Cruvy takes his attendants and walks. Old Cruvy will lift himself up out of his birth spot. Old Cruvy will walk down the hillside to wash his roots in the stream at the bottom of the hill. All the other trees will follow him down, and there they will have a dance, and there they will party, and they will celebrate life until they come back just before dawn and settle their roots back into the ground. And so all of our fledglings, we must take them with us. We've all got to leave. All our nests will be disturbed. They will fall out of the branches as the trees dance. We are flying to safety. But Jack, you should be careful too. And you should talk to your mother, because she knows about this day. Tell her that today is the day that old Cruvy will take his trees to dance. Well, Jack, when he heard that news, he gathered up the sheep early. And as he was gathering them up, he saw Mary coming hurrying towards him. And she said, Jack, I don't know quite what's going on, but the castle, the hall, it's full of noise and bustle. The Laird of the Black Arts is marching around here, there and everywhere, and he's planning a journey up to the woods tonight. And he says that you are to take the sheep home early, and that no one is to go anywhere near the woods tonight. If he sees anybody near the trees tonight, there will be trouble. So Jack, take the sheep back early. Make sure you stay out of his way. Well, this is getting stranger and stranger. And Jack thanked Mary. He took the sheep back to his cottage, and he penned them up ready for the next day. And he went in, and there was his mother waiting for him. And she said, Jack, it's today. I thought it was this midsummer, and it is. It's definitely this year. And Jack said, the birds told me. They said that the oak trees were going to pull their roots up and go down to the stream to dance. They are, Jack, she said, they are. But oak trees, each one of them gathers a treasure. Each one of them has riches gathered in their roots. When the oak trees pull themselves up, when they leave their birth spots, when they go down to the stream, there will be jewels left in their birth spots, in the holes that they leave behind them. And Jack, don't take too much. You could take 1, maybe 2 jewels, but you could go tonight, and there'll be enough there to keep us going for the rest of our lives. And Jack, I've made you a present. And she held out a ball of wool, it looked like. Jack said, what is it? What's it for? And she said, Jack, it's a ladder. I've made it, spun it, and tied it from all the bits and scraps of wool that you've gathered for me off the brambles and the bushes, and I made it into a ladder because, Jack, you need to be careful going down into those bare spots. Don't go down into one of those trees holes unless you've tied the ladder on first, made it secure to make sure you can get back out again. Will you promise me that? I'll promise, said Jack. And she said, now, Jack, go and get a couple of hours sleep now while you can, because you'll not be getting much sleep tonight. I'll wake you when it's time. So Jack went and he had a little bit of a lie down, and it seemed no time at all before his mother was shaking him. And he realised that it was getting dark outside, that dusk was coming on. And she said, it's time, Jack. And so Jack, he took that ball that his mother had given him and he put it in his pocket, and he made his way to the hillside and to the oak grove. And carefully, cautiously, trying to make no sound, he walked up the hillside along the edge of the tree line, trying to make no sound because there was an eerie stillness to the night. The birds had all gone, had all flown. There was no singing, no nighttime, dusk-time chorus. And so slowly he made his way up the hillside, and he sat at the top to wait and to see what would happen. And then he saw another man, a shadow, a silhouette, also walking up the hill, and he realised it was the Laird of the Black Hart. And Jack, he lay down amongst the heather and the grass so that the Laird wouldn't see him. And the Laird was pacing backwards and forwards, impatiently. And the air that was already still and quiet took on a broodingness. There was an ominous silence now. Nothing moved. And then there was a creak. Jack, he seemed to hear another sound that he could barely hear, but more feel with his body lying against the ground. The ground itself began to creak, to hum, and then it began to shudder. And there was more creaking and groaning and sighing and rustling, and he realised that the trees were starting to pull their roots out from the ground. And the ground began to shudder and to judder more and more as those roots came out, were put down on the surface of the ground. And the trees slowly began to make their way down the hillside. And old Cruvy himself, Jack was glad he was lying down, because the ground seemed to be almost liquid beneath him as Cruvy, that great tree, pulled and heaved himself out of the ground and began to thudder and judder down the hillside. Jack had never seen anything like it in all his days, and he lay there in wonder. The Laird of the Black Hart was rubbing his hands, and he went running almost before the trees had gone into the crumpled and rumpled ground that the trees had left behind them, great yawning caverns left where the trees had had their roots. Jack followed more cautiously. The moon was full, and the stars, well, they were bright, though not as bright as they could be with the moon shining so strongly. He could see where he was going as long as he was careful. He picked his way and looked in those bare spots, those big holes left by the trees, and sure enough, he could see, caught in the moonlight, gleams of blue and red and gold and like little white stars themselves, diamonds and rubies and sapphires and emeralds. And he remembered what his mother had said, and he reached into his pocket and he pulled out the ball of wool and he started to unravel it, and he saw that indeed it was a rope ladder, but he wasn't quite sure what to attach it to now because all the trees had gone. But he managed to find a fallen log, and he tied it around the fallen log. He made sure that it was tight, and he threw it down the hole of one of the nearest trees where it had been, a hole that wasn't too deep. In fact, he put the ladder there because his mother had told him to, but he just jumped down into the birth spot, and he saw beautiful ruby. He picked up that ruby, and he felt a little jolt as he did, and he looked up. Now he saw why his mother had given him the rope ladder, because he had just dropped about 6 feet down. The hole was deeper than it was when he got in. He put that ruby into his pocket, and then he used the rope ladder to pull himself back up. And then he put that rope ladder over the other side of the fallen log and into another of the birth spots. And he jumped down, and this time he picked up beautiful emeralds. put that into his pocket, but once again he felt that jolt, and once again he was glad of the rope ladder to help himself get out. And that was 2 beautiful big jewels, enough to keep him set for life. And he undid the rope ladder, he rolled it back up into a ball, and he was about to head away, because he was sure that he could hear the sound of the trees. The ground was beginning to judder again. But he couldn't quite resist the curiosity. He made his way to the centre of the wood to see where old Cruvy had stood. And he looked into that yawning hole. And it went down and down and down and down. And at the bottom, there he could see the Laird of the Black Art with a sack filling it full of gems and gold. And every time he took a handful, he got deeper and deeper and deeper. And Jack called down to the Laird, Laird, the trees are coming, it's time to get out, let me help you. And the Laird looked up and he said, I said there was supposed to be nobody here. Jack, you have disobeyed my orders. But Laird, you must come out. I am not yet finished. But the trees are coming, said Jack. And the Laird looked up and now he saw how deep it was and he said, boy, you're right, it's getting deep. Help me out. And Jack, he threw down the rope ladder. He said, I don't think it's strong enough for you and your gems. Tie the gems on first. I'll pull them up. I'll send the ladder back down for you. Ha! Said the Laird of the Black Art. I'm not falling for that. You'll take the jewels for yourself. You need to take me and the jewels up at the same time. And he grabbed hold of the rope ladder with the jewels under his arm and he tried to pull himself up, but the rope ladder snapped. Put the jewels down, said Jack. And now the Laird did put them down and he tried to reach up, but he was still reaching down for the jewels and he couldn't reach the ladder and take the jewels with him. And he couldn't bring himself to leave those jewels behind. And by now, all around them was full of towering black shapes as the trees came back, as one by one they settled themselves back into their places. And the ground was thumping and thudding and jolting as the greatest tree of all, the king of the grove, old Cruvy himself, was coming. And Jack said to the Laird, Laird, you must come now. But the Laird still hesitated. And Jack had to throw himself back out of the way of old Cruvy. As old Cruvy came back, old Cruvy spread his great roots into his bare spot. He settled down, and even in the dark, and with old Cruvy being a tree, Jack could still swear that that tree was smiling. There was never any sign of the Laird again after that. Though old Cruvy did seem to be refreshed, and his leaves a little greener with the added fertiliser. Jack, he made his way out of the woods, avoiding the trees as they settled into place, avoiding all the bare spots, until he was safe out of the grove, out into the moonlight and the hillside. And he made his way back home, and he showed his mother the 2 jewels that he had taken, the ruby and the emerald. And that was enough to make a man rich. The ruby he spent on his mother, and he built her a fine house. And she had a well-stocked larder and enough money and food to have a girl come and live with her and help her take place, help her take care of the house and look after things. The other jewel was enough for Jack to buy his own house and a wedding dress and a ring, and to ask Mary to marry him, and the 2 of them, they set up house together. But it wasn't enough to give up work and to do nothing for the rest of their lives. Jack and Mary, they still worked hard, and they worked for the new Laird, the Laird's son, a much nicer man who paid a fair wage to both Jack's mother and to Jack and to Mary. But it was enough to take away the worry, and it was enough to have them comfortable and to have children and enjoy their long lives together. So this is a song that I always think of in May, and it's a song that I got from Duncan Williamson. Jew Thomas he sat on Huntley bank, beneath the Eildon tree, when he saw a fair lady come riding over the lea. Her mantle was of forest green, her tresses so very fair, and on every tassel of a horse's mane hung 20 silver bells and more. Jew Thomas he doffed off his cap, got down upon one knee. You are the fairest queen, he said, that ever I did see. Oh no, oh no, oh Thomas, she said, that name does not belong to me, for I have come from Elfinland, I have come to visit with thee. So mount up, oh Thomas, she said, if you would come with me, and I will take you to Elfinland, though it's very far away. So they rode, and they rode, and they merrily, merrily rode. They rode for a night and a day, until they came to a red river that flowed across their way. What river is this, oh Thomas, he said, oh please to me do say. This is a river of blood, she said, that is spilled on the earth in one day. So they rode, and they rode, and they merrily, merrily rode. They rode for a night and a day, until they came to a crystal river that flowed across their way. What river is this, oh Thomas, he said, oh please to me do say. This is a river of tears, she said, that is spilled on the earth in one day. So they rode, and they rode, and they merrily, merrily rode. They rode for a night and a day, until they came to a fair broad road that lay across their way. What road is this, oh Thomas, he said, oh please to me do tell. That is a road you must never ever take, for that road leads to hell. So they rode, and they rode, and they merrily, merrily rode. They rode for a night and a day, until they came to a thorny path that wound across their way. What path is that, oh Thomas, he said, oh please to me do say. Oh, that is the road to heaven, she said, but it's few that pass that way. So they rode, and they rode, and they merrily, merrily rode. They rode for a night and a day, until they came to a great orchard that lay across their way. Lie down, oh Thomas, he said, for it's hungry that I be. Lie down, oh Thomas, he said, some fine apples I do see. Oh, touch them not, oh Thomas, she said, oh, touch them not, I pray, for they are made of the curses that fall on the earth in one day. But she's reached up into a tree so high, and she's plucked down an apple as they went riding by. But eat you this, oh Thomas, said she, as we go riding by, and it will give to you a tongue that will never tell a lie. So they rode, and they rode, and they merrily, merrily rode. They rode for a night and a day, until they came to a fair broad vale that lay across their way. What place is this? Oh, Thomas, he said, oh, please tell me, do say. Oh, this is Elfinland, she said, and it's here that we will stay. So Thomas got shoes of a lovely brown, and a cloak of elfin green, and for 7 long years and a day on earth was never seen. But after that time, to Thomas, he did turn back up. He came back to Ercildoune. He walked back into his hall, and with him he brought a truth-telling tongue, a tongue of poetry and prophecy. And with him he brought a little harp, so that he could sing those prophecies and tell that poetry with music to sweeten that truth a little bit. And soon people began to gather to him. They would come to hear his poetry, to hear his singing and his harp playing and his prophecies. And many of those prophecies were written down, and some have come true and some have yet to be. But Thomas lived till he was an old man. And then one day, he was having an evening recital. People had come to listen to him, and they were sat listening when suddenly his voice fell silent, and slowly the note of his harp faded away, and he was looking towards the door, and on his face a look of such joy, happiness and love, and everybody turned to see what he was looking at, and there in the doorway was a white hart and a white hind. They stepped into the gathering, and side by side they walked up to Thomas. And Thomas, he put one hand on the heart of the hind and one hand on the head of the hart. And then the 3 of them together walked through the hall and out of the door. And as they stepped over the threshold, it was as if a spell had been broken. Everybody let out a breath they'd been holding, and everybody realised they wanted to know where Thomas was going. They jumped to their feet and they followed him out of the door. And Thomas was making his way down the hillside, past the thorn tree, down to the river Leader. And when they came to the river, the 3 of them didn't even break step. They just walked into the waters, and they walked deeper and deeper until the waters closed over their heads. And they looked for the bubbles of Thomas's breath. They looked for him to come up on the other side. But Thomas was gone. And that was the last that was ever seen of him in this world. Hopefully it's not the last you'll see of me. And hopefully I'll come back to the World Storytelling Cafe and bring you some more stories. But for now, I'll leave you in this month of May with the bird song and the bluebells. Thank you for coming and joining me for this session. Thank you for spending your time with me. And it's been lovely to tell you some stories today.
Did you enjoy that storyteller? Of course you did. And if you enjoyed it, like the minstrels of old, we're passing round the hat. And if you have some, whether it's paper or coin, our storytellers would appreciate what you put in. Every penny you put in goes directly to that storyteller through paper. All you have to do is go to worldstorytellingcafe.com, click on today's stories or click on that storyteller, and there'll be a hat below the story, and you can just drop a little in that hat. Well, thank you for listening. And if you can afford it, we'd appreciate it.